Inherency. So far, the United States has only taken action for GHG regulation and R&D funding of new technology. For oil efforts have only centered on a reduction in demand through fuel economy standards. Gordon and Matthews, 2016. The measures the United States has taken today, as well as those that are planned, are notably incomplete. They have relied on only two of the three types of policy levels: regulation and R&D funding of new technologies. Prices so far have not been put to work at the national level. Thus, the plan, the United States federal government should establish a federally mandated variable price and carbon tax and household level lump sum rebate policy for petroleum refineries in the United States. Advantage 1: environmental racism. Petroleum refineries impose the most disparate burden of air toxins on people of color. This is due in particular to co-pollutants from the refining process. Boyson Pastor 2013 evidence. In the case of air toxins, we find that petroleum refineries impose the most disparate burden on people of color, followed by chemical manufacturers and power plants. Refineries and the most disparate impacts on minorities. Any climate policy that fails to incorporate air quality code defense into its design will not only forego public health benefits, but is also likely to violate U.S. federal government directives to consider environmental equity and rural decision making. This is mandated by Executive Order 12898. The clustering of industrial facilities in specific locations can exacerbate health disparities resulting from pollution exposure. And the impact is that refineries are directly responsible for the production of higher rates of death and disease for black and brown communities across the United States. Kane Caps 2012 evidence. The health gap is especially striking among low-income, non-white residents whose homes center cluster around the industrial sites. People of color in Richmond live on average 10 years less than white people living in other parts of the country. Again, African Americans are especially hard hit with asthma, emergency visions, and emissions about 4 times out of other racial groups in the country. The same pattern holds true naturally. Blacks are much more likely to die of heart disease and stroke than their white counterparts, and black children are more likely to die of asthma. I can see Chevron spraying and fire coming out of the stacks. My mother and grandmother would go around, shut the windows and doors, but I have to take my niece Tracy to the hospital and get her in a breathing machine. Combustion byproducts such as polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons or PHAs were found at higher levels. Fine particles exceed California's annual air quality standard. Nearly half of Richmond homes. Vanadium can irritate the upper respiratory tract, lungs, eyes, and skin, and lead to chronic bronchitis. Sulfates can be inhaled deep into the lungs. We found that living near an oil refinery adds exposures that may be hazardous to health. Toxic pollution from oil refineries doesn't stay outside, it seeps into the homes where people spend most of their time. And environmental racism is a microcosm of racial apartheid in the United States. We must look at the role that race plays in determining the exploitation of black and brown communities by polluting industry. Bullard 2011 evidence. Apartheid environmental policies limit mobility, reduce neighborhood options, diminish job opportunities, and decrease choices for millions of Americans. Race still plays a significant part in distributing public benefits and burdens associated with economic growth. The roots of discrimination are deep and have been difficult to eliminate. It has been difficult for millions of Americans in segregated neighborhoods to say, not my backyard, they do not have a backyard. Nationally, only about 44% of African Americans own their home, compared to over 2/3 of the nation as a whole. Homeowners are the strongest advocates in the NIMBY position taken against locally owned land uses. Generally, white communities have greater access to people of color communities when it comes to influencing land use and environmental decision making. People of color once again have the same opportunities to vote with their feet and escape undesirable physical circumstances. Economic development, environmental policies flow from forces of production and often dominated and subsidized by state actors. On the other hand, state actors have done a miserable job of protecting central city residents from the ravages of industrial pollution and non-residential activities, values having a negative impact on the quality of life. And environmental racism is a distinct and key policy-making approach to solving environmental racism. This takes into account the role of institutional racism, incorporating community-level activism into policy deliberation. Frost 2002 evidence. Purposeful strategies for integrating environmental justice are key if we are effectively protect vulnerable populations and eliminate persistent health and class-based disparities in environmental hazard exposure and health outcomes. Environmental justice proposes a political economy perspective that serves the need to enhance community capacity to shape the environmental policy making and regulatory enforcement and to influence regional and economic development activities in systematic ways that benefit its residents. This process can be applied to government. The integration of environmental justice and the precautionary principle offers possibilities for new and innovative approaches to addressing issues of environmental health. Community participation is key for developing long-term regulatory enforcement and economic development initiatives that are sustainable and that protect the health of diverse and vulnerable communities. The challenge for advocates, scientists, and policymakers alike is to keep in mind that environmental policy making as generate clarity out in the blue, or the distinction between the scientific and social political realms is often unclear. Integrating some of the overarching goals of environmental justice and advantage two of research and development. Smart tax key to spurring clean tech R&D. Gordon Matthews 2016 evidence. Finally, oil is by far the most diverse of all fuels, ranging from light mixtures of liquids and gas to solid beryllium and kerosene, differing profoundly in the composition and the refined products they produce. This great diversity limits the applicability of regulatory and technological approaches to cutting emissions from oil. Each of these characteristics makes the price signal important to controlling emissions from all sources of energy. Vital in the case of oil regulation in the development of new technology can be effective in the absence of a clear price signal. Both are far more effective if they work in step with market forces rather than separate or even against them. And a carbon tax spurs innovation in green technologies. There's a symbiotic relationship between petroleum and green energy production sectors. Free 2015 evidence. A carbon tax innovation in green technologies. These technological advances lower the cost of reducing carbon emissions. The tax induces large movements in innovation that have considerable effect on energy prices, production, and other macroeconomic aggregates. Abstracting from endogenous innovation and modeling technological practices as exogenous results in substantial overestimation of the carbon tax necessary to obtain a given reduction in emissions. Spillovers imply that technology developed for one sector increases the productivity of innovation in the other sectors if the spillovers are sufficiently strong. Then the unique balance growth patterns in an interior solution in which innovation occurs in both the fossil and green energy sectors, and domestic innovation in green technology spills over because of technology production. Key to international cooperation on clean energy, Meltzer 2014 evidence. The adoption by the United States of carbon tax will create an incentive for both U.S. and overseas firms to innovate and develop green technologies. Carbon taxing induces innovation by incentivizing U.S. firms to innovate and produce green technologies that reduce the impact of the tax on all firms will be innovators, and many will instead turn to the market to obtain the latest green technologies to reduce their CO2 emissions. This demand for green technologies by the world's largest economy will also create a strong global incentive for the development of new green technologies in other countries. Increased global innovation in green technologies will also have a range of positive spillovers because of carbon tax, unlike a technology standard, creates an incentive to find multiple ways of reducing CO2 emissions. The increase in innovation that will follow the introduction of the United States of carbon tax should lead to the opportunities for international collaboration and cooperation. In some areas, the United States has already forged these ties with the U.S.-China Clean Energy Research Center. And international cooperation is key to mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. IPCC 2014 evidence. International cooperation is necessary to significantly mitigate climate change because of the global nature of the problem. Cooperation has the potential to address several challenges, multiple actors, emission sources that are unevenly distributed, heterogeneous climate impacts that are uncertain in distance, space, and time, and mitigation costs that vary. Considering the relationship between mitigation costs and climate benefits discussed above, there is insufficient evidence for actors at any level to reduce emissions significantly. In the absence of international cooperation, some emission reductions can occur without cooperation due to positive externalities of otherwise self-beneficial actions or co-benefits, such as actions to reduce energy expenditures. And the impact is that mitigating climate change, it prevents thousands of deaths and billions of dollars of economic damage to the United States. France 2015 evidence. Climate change could kill 12,000 people annually in the U.S. and damages to coastal properties from rising sea levels will surpass $5 trillion through 2100 of actions that are taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. With air quality mitigation, though, there is significant public health benefit in the United States. It's 13,000 premature deaths in 2015, 57,000 premature deaths will be avoided by the year 2100. And the mitigation scenario, extreme death will be reduced by 64% in 2050 and by 93% in the year 2100. If greenhouse gas emissions are reduced an estimated 190,000 in leverage across the nation will become structurally vulnerable due to climate change. With the greenhouse gas mitigation, the U.S. would avoid spending an estimated 4.2 to 7.4 billion in road damage by 2100. And solvency. Sectoral-based taxes are key to solve for the role the co-pollutants play in producing air pollution. Voice and Passion 2013 evidence. Sectorial tax systems can be designed to ensure emissions reductions in high-priority sectors. Our findings suggest that the petroleum, refinery, and chemical manufacturing sectors have above-average co-pollutant intensities and that their emissions rank high in disproportionate impact on minorities and low-income communities. And tax revenue will go to households most affected by air pollution from refineries. Gordon Matthews 2016 evidence. Political as well as economic considerations argue strongly that the tax or fee be revenue neutral. That is, all revenues are immediately and directly returned to the economy. Revenue neutrality has two great advantages. It minimizes the effects of the target beyond that of which it is aimed and will greatly ease the path to enactment, while revenue neutrality avoids one political battles. Exclusively one remains in the matter of how the revenues are returned to the economy, and to whom there are almost an infinite number of possibilities. Whatever formula is adopted, it must meet two criteria. It must be simple and transparent to the American public, and it must be equally attractive to both political parties. For example, by allocating the revenues to reimbursing poor and middle income families for the added cost of oil. And taxing refineries is key. This is the easiest and most effective set of production tasks. Marin and Potter 2014 evidence. In theory, the best way to tax carbon dioxide would be to monitor all emissions and tax at a uniform rate. Unfortunately, such monitoring would be prohibitively expensive given the large number of sources. One fallback would be to focus on large sources that can be easily monitored as and have been done regulating other pollutants, but that would reducing emissions. Another approach would be to identify proxies for carbon emissions would be effectively taxed instead. The best place to impose a carbon tax would be at the point of the supply chain where carbon content would be easily measured, and the number of taxpayers relatively small. For coal, this would be at the mine, for the petroleum at the refinery, and for natural gas and processing facilities, or for those that bypass them the wild. Going upstream to oil wells and importers could expand administrative and compliance burdens without increasing the effectiveness of the tax, while going downstream from these points would weaken the link between the tax and actual carbon emissions. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. And then I stand for cross-X.
Oh wait, where did you get to?
Oh, I finished it.
Alright, cool, awesome.
30 seconds.
Okay, cross-X.
Yeah. You're good? Let's start at the very bottom, Gordon, right?
Yeah.
So he advocates for a revenue neutral tax, right? Carbon
Yeah.
tax. Is that what you're advocating for?
Yes.
Alright, cool. Just clarify that. Let's go to environmental racism. Could you explain voice?
Which one here? The
first card.
first
Why
card.
there's a burden on people of color.
Why is there a burden?
Yeah, just explain the burden. Like,
So essentially the burden is that these factors that produce these dangerous co-pollutants that make people sick, bronchitis, asthma, and whatnot, that is most disproportionately affected and like put on people of color in the U.S.
How is that like based off of carbon emissions? Like, what's the link?
The co-pollutants.
But yeah, it's like as we said in our inherency here, it's the co-pollutants that do most of the damage. Like it emits carbon plus these like dangerous co-pollutants from like fluoride gas and hydrocarbons and stuff like that.
Wait, so gases other than carbon dioxide?
Well, it comes from
It comes from the oil manufacturing, but I mean they're all carbon.
So wait,
based.
would you sell for that with a carbon tax? Like, if that's not one of the gases that causes these health
Yeah, we
issues?
sell for it with a carbon tax because they're like
Why?
carbon based because of the same ones that hurt people and like make them sick.
Wait, which ones are they again? Could you explain the gases?
What is it? Polycyclic hydrocarbons. They're carbon based. I mean, they would still be restricted under the carbon tax because they're carbon like based or gases that are being put out.
Where do you specify that? Like in your polling tax?
Wherever it says like polycyclic hydrocarbons. I don't know whatever that says.
Do you solve for climate change / global warming?
We mitigate.
Oh, you do mitigate it. Okay. Let's go to K then. Your second card.
Which one?
K under environmental
King
reason.
cats.
Oh, can cats from 12.
Yeah. So explain to me like how this is suddenly gone after you sell for carbon tax. Just continue to explain it.
How what is suddenly gone?
All their health disease issues and all that stuff.
I mean, it's not suddenly gone, but we stopped contributing to it.
And we give back.
And we
to
give
them.
back with the community benefit fund. We give back to them.
Okay, so this is just again a util impact at the end of the day.
I mean, we stop polluting on black and brown communities.
Right.
I mean,
But you're
call
using
it-
this as a util impact. Like it's
I mean,
not.
call it what you want to call it, but I mean,
Sure. So
What
what?
tax level are you implementing?
do what?
What's the carbon tax level? Do you know yet?
It's on oil refineries.
Like what
No, like,
percentage? though?
yeah.
Oh, it's do we not specify the variable? It's variable pricing carbon tax, which means it's like
So does that depend on the refinery and how much they're producing?
yeah, the more you produce, the more you pay.
Wouldn't it be
Is
better
there
to
a
do
cap
it
and
based off?
trade, or is it just you guys
No,
cannot?
it's no cap and trade.
No country.
Okay.
Wait, would it be better for states to implement this because
No.
they could actually specify the different levels of taxes in each state based off of the industry
No, it wouldn't.
specificity? No?
Who's
Okay.
your actor?
Who's our actor? Is the U.S. federal government.
Any specific branch or agency?
Given the recent political developments, we've grown with fiat.
Is that really how it works? Okay, sure. Why not?
Yeah, that's how it works.
Do you need prep or are you good?
Let's take some prep.
Okay.
Let's take some prep.
Alright, started.
I'm gonna just send this entire file to you.
What?
It's not very long. Just read the first half of this.
We've got
about-
650 left.
Yep.
Okay, I sent it.
Here's what's need to take a look at it. Yeah, it hasn't come through. His came a little faster.
Where is it next? 2 often kicks.
Did you send it out?
She did. It just takes a while usually.
Okay, no worries.
I am about to.
Everyone ready? Did you get the?
Yeah, got it.
Okay.
But I didn't even get it. I got it too. I got it too.
Everyone ready?
Yep.
Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Counterplan, the 50 states should establish a variable pricing carbon tax on and household level lump sum rebate policy for petroleum refineries in the U.S. First, the devolution would produce a more effective and efficient country. James 01. Devolution would produce a more efficient federal government and more responsive states. Next, Congress has authority to develop power to the state. Speed limit proves Yellow 05. Central government nationalized the maximum speed. The national standard remained until the 1980s when a partial devolution transferred some power back to the states. 1990 saw Congress return to the states unlimited control. Next, federal preemption doctrine strike makes the counterplan mutually exclusive. Young 99. Preemption occurs when federal laws trump state lawmaking authority when there is outright or actual conflict between federal and state law where compliance with both federal and state law is in fact physically impossible. State solve, bold of H1. The act leaves the specifics to the state is providing funds for the state development and implementation of the plans. It acknowledges the regional differences and needs. It encourages states to develop management approaches. It promotes regional interstate coordination. Powers of states has increased over this time. States have become increasingly sophisticated and capable, more active in defending and promoting their interests. Next, current regulations fail because states need more power for effective environmental regulation. Adler 714. The federal government has limited resources. Authorizing or mandating the federal government to oversee and regulate all environmental concerns is wasteful and inefficient. The overlapping state and federal roles do not lead to efficient efficient environmental protection. The state leadership and environmental policy was supplanted by federal regulation. Environmental policy could be improved if states regain more of their role. Next, states tied to more than the federal government. Hogue 14. States have taken steps to regulate commercial chemicals that aren't regulated by federal rules. Environmental activists, state attorneys general, some businesses want states to retain authority. 15 state legislatures have introduced chemical regulation proposals. And states have already implemented anti-warming efforts. Canada 714. States are well positioned to handle the federal government's requirements. Several states have already put a price on carbon dioxide pollution, and their economies are doing fine. Next, states can do more. Child 14. Impacts of climate change are here. Obama's administration revealed actions to help states prepare for climate change impacts. States can provide more opportunities for green infrastructure projects. Next, federal enforcement depends on states. Gallucci 14. Obama outlined an EPA plan to require states to reduce carbon dioxide emissions for power plants within their borders. Next, on to the DA. No warming now. Computer models are exaggerated and alarmism is used for funding. Washington Square Journal. Wall Street Journal 12. A large and growing number of distinguished scientists do not agree that drastic actions on warming are needed. Nobel Prize winning scientist Javer publicly resigned from the APS because I cannot live with the APS statement. Warming is occurring. Large numbers of scientists, many very prominent, share the opinions of Javer. The reason is a collection of stubborn scientific facts. Perhaps the most inconvenient is the lack of warming. The lack of warming suggests that computer models have greatly exaggerated how much warming additional CO2 can cause. Alarmism over climate is of great benefit to many, providing government funding. Skip the next part. Solving global warming locks in the permanent ice age outweighs the case. Hoyle 99. The renewal of ice age conditions would render the world's major food growing areas inoperable and inevitably lead to extinction. We must inject greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Without the greenhouse gas effect, Earth would be locked into a permanent ice age. The heat of the ocean saves us from an immediate onset of ice age conditions. We need all the greenhouse we can get. Let the world climate drift downward, and the consequent formation of atmospheric ice crystals will plunge Earth immediately back into an ice age. This part is case. We don't know the optimal tax level. This ensures delay in Congress will correct errors Wagner 08. A tax only achieves emissions reductions indirectly through the price. We don't know the appropriate level of tax that will induce the changes in demand and consumption to bring emissions down far enough, fast enough to avoid climate change, and we don't have the time or political attention span to try the different taxes and search for the right level. As the economy grows, so will emissions, and the tax will need to be raised. Political pressures will be often present to set the tax low to begin, and lower afterwards. After just witness calls for gas tax holiday, we neither know what the right tax is nor have the political will to set it to that level. BC. British Columbia's carbon tax empirically hasn't worked economically, and CO2 emissions are still increasing. The entire scheme was regressive, which applied more pressure to the middle and lower class. Tillman 16. This is also a turn. The impact of carbon taxes is overstated by people who love carbon taxes, and it's annoying that the tax has generated so much incredible praise. Carbon taxes will work even on a per capita basis. Emissions have risen. Greenhouse gas emissions went up, nor is the carbon tax fair. It's a regressive tax that benefits big businesses and the wealthy at the expense of lower middle income earners. I'm gonna keep reading the bolded. The Liberals pledge to offset the carbon tax with reductions in other taxes, but these have favored businesses, not families. The low income credit in particular offset the carbon tax for the bottom 40%, where it was first introduced in 2008, but as the tax has gone up, the credit has not making the whole regime regressive. That is low income households pay a greater share of their income to the tax than higher income households. BC's carbon tax also fails to deliver because it doesn't fund a single green initiative, not one dime from it pays for bike lanes or buses or wind turbines. While Vancouver's millionaires got a big tax break to buy a new $100,000 Tesla car, the Surrey mom or Prince George's dad got dinged for higher tax and heating costs.
I sent you guys extra stuff. Just keep going.
Okay. Climate change regulations increase electricity prices, increase upward pressure on the grid that converges with physical pressures to collapse the system and cause massive energy poverty. Eppinger and Banks 13. The price of electricity will rise. Stricter environmental regulations are converging to exert upward pressure on utility expenditures, slower growth, and accelerated deployment of energy efficiency programs, codes, and standards are flattening demand. Cyber attacks have caused smaller scale outages. Extreme weather is forcing utilities to spend more on resiliency and reliability. Rising costs, flat demand, and concerns related to resiliency of the grid are occurring as support for renewable energy has increased. High cost of distributed generation and dangerous subsidies, creating an unfair burden for customers not deploying them. The trends are occurring simultaneously and rapidly outstripping existing regulatory models. And blackouts go nuclear. Andres and Breeds 11. DoD is unable to provide bases with electricity when the grid is offline. Critical strategic and wireless command authorities are dependent on the grid, which is vulnerable. Neither the grid nor backup power provides reliability. Global military operations could be seriously compromised. Planning an opponent could escalate to nuclear war. Renewable facility will not island the vast majority of bases. Most bases would not be able to function.
Alright, I'll find more stuff.
Alright.
Just keep it in the camera. I'll find more stuff to read.
Okay, why don't we go back to the second Ice Age card that I skipped? It's the warming won't cause extinction, Lombard 08. To cause billions to die, it would require the surge to occur within a single human lifespan. This is insidiously wrong and misleading for the Copenhagen consensus. The Copenhagen consensus didn't survey all the problems, all the benefits from a temperature rise. More people die from heat, but fewer from cold. Agriculture yields will increase in temperate zones. Benefits outweigh costs. This is not the end of humanity. Global warming, even in 3 centuries, will not be a challenge to our civilization.
We'll just end it there.
Alright,
Can't find
process.
anything. Oh, sorry.
Good to go?
Yes.
Should not have cut it that much.
Okay, cool. So in your CAMA 14 evidence, you say states have already implemented anti-warming standards. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know what those standards have been? Like what kinds of laws or systems they've had?
Not in particular, no.
Nothing referenced. Okay. So going on to your, can you explain again how the ice age happens? How we need to like keep polluting in order to prevent ice
So,
ages?
you can go first.
Okay, so right now carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and it's increasing global temperatures, which is what most people can agree on. And what it says is that it's actually this rise in temperatures that's staving off the next ice age. So we have cars, I mean maybe we didn't read them, but it says that we're about 600 years overdue for the next ice age, and without this like temperature buffer, we will all die from cold.
But didn't you say earlier that warming was like highly exaggerated and that there was an alarmist response?
Yeah. So when we say
There
exaggerated,
is
we
a
mean
little
like the
bit-
extinction scenarios
Yeah.
exaggerated.
Do we
Like,
have any? Do we have any extinction scenarios?
Hmm?
Do we have any extinction scenarios?
we're
No.
just saying they are exaggerated.
It's okay.
I mean, it doesn't matter if you read it or not. We're just limiting.
You talked
impacts.
about the worst impacts of global warming, which is in one of your cards, so I don't know what that
Does
represents.
that necessarily mean extinction? 'Cause the only
I don't know
impacts
your cards. You can come up and tell me what it means in the next speech.
Okay. Let's go to your electricity spike blackouts DA that you added at the end here, the extra stuff.
Blackouts, yes.
Yeah.
So your electricity prices go up, and then causes blackouts, and this blackout equals extinction, right? Like global war or something.
Well, if
It's
you
a
want to
lot of
simplify it,
instability,
yeah.
mostly.
Basically the
lack of-
blackouts. It also
What is
ties-
the impact of the blackouts?
So the net impact is the extinction. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, are you saying that every time electricity prices go up, this causes?
No.
Blackouts?
No. It's specifically this time. It's
Okay. Do
specifically
you have
this
any
time.
evidence for a time when that happened?
It hasn't happened before. We're saying this time it will.
Okay.
Yeah.
So only when electricity prices go up because of environmental policies.
No,
that
it's
we get
because of a
blackouts.
carbon tax specifically. It's like how detrimental, it's too big of a change in the prices all at once.
Okay.
And that's what's gonna affect the poorer households and like.
One of the other ones is it was under your solvency, and you say we don't know what the optimal tax level is.
Yes.
Did anywhere in our 1AC did we propose what the tax level was going to be?
We're saying
I
that's
don't
the
know,
issue.
that's the problem. Like if you
You
have
can't just
a
be
card and you
radical.
say, 5% is perfect, then we can talk about your 5%, but you said we don't know, and we're saying, yeah, you don't know, which means that Congress isn't gonna get it right.
Well, it's
gonna
not
be
price, but our tax is variable depending on how much you produce, so it's not really.
I mean, you
set
still have a
number.
standard, right? Like even income tax, which is variable, still has a standard of how it's set up. You've not told us that, and there's a huge issue with
Just
solvency
because it's
on that.
variable doesn't mean that whatever multiplying factor you use is going to be correct.
Like for example, if all the states have different like rates,
Okay.
right? Companies are gonna go to different states.
Right. Thank you.
No.
No. Good.
Saving it and medicine.
The extra stuff, yeah. I sent it over.
Yeah.
Try not to lose the camera.
Okay, what's the order?
So it's gonna go case, ice age dis ed, then the counter plan, then to the grid dis ed,
Oh, that was just a turn off case.
which is turn on case.
Yeah. Wasn't a separate date.
Alright. Well, I guess then the last little bit we'll have to reverse back up to case.
Okay, so you'll answer the first couple arguments in case, then disad, counterplan, then the grid arc.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Y'all ready?
Hang on, it's opening.
Sorry about that.
Forgot to.
Didn't mean to jump the gun.
Should be good in a second. Two AC round
Okay,
three.
yeah, it's up.
I'm going to give a brief overview of this. The 1AC is a policy prescription to combat climate change. They concede inherency, so all their offenses immune to burden of particularity. A variable carbon tax accounts for differential production scenarios and is the easiest and most effective side of production to tax. There's a structural imbalance in the way refineries impose a disparate burden on people of color that's King Cat's 12. This is the most important impact of this round. A carbon tax that punishes companies for shelling out dirty oil resists this antagonism that directly causes death and disease in black and brown communities. This is the most important impact of this round once again, and they concede. Fine, even if there is no scientific evidence on climate change, if you believe that, there is medical evidence produced by black and brown bodies getting sick and dying. The 1AC combats this microcosm of racial apartheid, and that's our Bullard evidence. We use a rebate policy to promote community-level activism. Our Morello evidence talks about how this level of activism is needed to combat environmental racism. And with their, when they talked about how Congress won't agree on this, it's fiat. As soon as you vote, it's enacted. And sectoral taxes solve best. First, it solves for the GHGs of the production and not the use of refined petroleum. Second, it takes into a unique process of petroleum production by accounting for more and less products. Gordon Matthews, 2016. If all oils were treated the same way, the tax was assessed not only in products and the most polluting in the climate sense, oils would receive the most favorable tax treatment because more of their emissions would go on tax and a carbon tax price of $20 metric per ton. On carbon dioxide and equivalent emissions, smart tax would be assessed $8 on the barrel of Eagle Ford ultralight condensate, not flaring that less than other sample oils rather than encourage the production of dirty oils. The tax designed to slow competition should indicate to the market that the GHG emissions of the oils must be reduced, bringing them into the line of the oils, or it should be send a clear sign for these oil types that should be developed fast, if at all, hence discouraged or rather than favored. And we must account for differential production of co-pollutants. Taxing by sector allows for targeted production on air pollution that cannot be accessed by CO2 production writ large, boys past 13. Frequently noted strength of price-based policies that they provide incentives not only to use available emission-reducing technology, but also to invest in research and development of new technology. And we cannot safely assume, however, the co-pollutants impact or will adequately addressed by other policies of better quality co-pollutants, very good cross-polluters, and efficient and equitable climate policy should take this into account. Such an approach is consistent with the growing interest in the multi-pollutant as opposed to single pollutant strategies for air quality management. And a carbon tax will work. British Columbia's experience proves it will succeed. Pedersen, Evil 15. Our 6 species carbon tax has been a success. Its primary objective has been achieved. Fossil fuels consumption on a per capita basis has fallen substantially, and in terms of emissions reductions targets set by legislation have been met. Some 70% of British Columbians now support the tax. The majority would likely see it increase, and there would be a negative political backlash to the tax species experience. So it's a carefully thought out tax shift that penalizes pollution while rewarding conservation and improving environmental outcomes could be a winner. This evidence presented here fully supports this observation. On to the dissent. Global warming is real and anthropogenic. 16 expert analysis of 6 independent peer-reviewed studies confirmed the consensus among climate scientists. Cook et al. 16. The consensus that humans causing recent global warming is shared by 90% to 100% of publishing climate scientists, according to the 6 independent studies. We examined the available studies and conclude that the finding of 97% consensus in published climate research is robust and consistent with other surveys of climate scientists and peer-reviewed studies. And without action to reduce emissions, we will approach or exceeding a 4 to 5 degrees Celsius change, resulting in a laundry list of catastrophes that exceed our ability to adapt. Reynolds and Means, 2014. The IPCC's report about impact was sobering. Farmers may not be able to grow enough food. Climate change will continue to increase the severity of storms, droughts, floods, and wildfires. By centuries end, sea level rise could displace hundreds of millions of people. Reducing poverty would be much more difficult. Food and water shortages, along with migrating populations, will destabilize any nations. IPCC warns its current trajectory. We're looking at a 4 to 5 degrees Celsius degree warming, way beyond any ability our civilization has to manage or adapt. Saying under 2 degrees Celsius requires the world to remain within a carbon budget. More than half the budget has been spent, and corporations and nations control their reserves of fossil fuel amounting to 5 times the amount of CO2 we can save. And this is one budget we cannot afford to bust. Yet we are trying to do that within 2 or 3 decades. So the ice age can't have their link here that climate change isn't happening now. We just proved that it is happening now. Everywhere that you look, it's happening now. Scientists agree that it's happening. Everyone's done their out-of-round research knowing that it happens now. On to the states. State counterplan is illegitimate because 1. Moots affirmative education by fiating out of any discussion of energy policy and only debating states' recent federal government. 2. Furthermore, the federalist education is made worthless by the counterplan's use of unprecedented 50-state fiat. The core debate in the literature regarding states' VFEDs is a trade-off between local and consistent universal implementation. By having all states do the exact same thing, fiat's it gets all the positive benefits and none of the trade-offs by actual state policy. That's not real world, and there's no counter because no literature on 50-state simulations fiat because it doesn't exist. 3. In conjunction with the politics is overwhelmingly far above the unrealistic fiat means the counterplan is functionally to do the app, but fiat we don't link to politics to skew competition, but overwhelmingly negative. Voter fairness is key internal link to education because good clash is key to education. Class is the unique benefit to policy debate, protecting the team, kicking the counterplan, kids connect the strategic benefit of conditionality, and it doesn't send a strong enough signal to deter. And national policy strengthens communities and nurtures the socio-political bond. Hughlin 99. Association really has a bond among fellows for all organized lives unmistakably results from a pact to solid contract. It is very existence and novelty of the Aleutianism idea of conscientia that establishes these rights for each and every one, though the organized process of mutual communication is only one aspect of mutual communication in all instances, from private family life to the universal commonwealth. The Constitution entails the communication or mutual sharing of whatever is useful and necessary. On one hand, the laws of administration, on the other hand, is conceptualization of politics as a permanent process of community building. The quality of social life is ultimately determined by the quality of political organization. In other words, political organization is not at all constructed from a particular presumption of human nature, rather than they sense the instinct for living together and establishing civil society. 6 was given to men. It was the task of politics to provide the kind of political organization which will most likely result in harmonious social life. The political organization is generally circumscribed as a mutual communication of things, services, and common rights, but as all of us immediately insist, it has to be applied in a different way according to the nature of each association. And permutation, federal leadership with state involvement is the best method to reduce emissions. Brown, EPA Program Manager 96. If the U.S. is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the federal government must play a major leadership role to stabilize atmospheric levels of greenhouse gases. For the feat to be accomplished, state and government must become centrally involved in all overall U.S. efforts. And many states are experiencing severe financial difficulties. Pew Charitable Trust 16. States' recoveries are incomplete. More than 20 states have still collect less tax revenue than at their recession era peaks, and most have yet to rebuild their financial cushions to pre-recession levels. 22 states' employment rates trail 2007 levels. Growth has fallen short of historic norms. State face financial pressures that will shape budgets now and for years to come, and state financial difficulties ensure implementation issues and insufficient commitment. Rob 04. Many states are experiencing severe difficulties. Many state officials will activate climate change programs. Consider this fiscal threat may imperil the implementation of existing policies and the development of additional ones. Any longer-term strategy for greenhouse gases, gas reduction that gives states central roles in policy development and implementation will have to address the uneven levels of state commitment and ensure that the core fiscal needs are met. And on to, I guess, the case again. So with this grid argument, there's no link. Plan 1 will incentivize use of cleaner fuels. The electricity responds to price fluctuations by adapting to cleaner fuel. No historical collapse. This will selectively pass the tax down through the energy system, creating incentives for fuel switching and investments in more energy efficient technologies and reduce CO2 emissions. The real-world experience of firms and individuals responding to changing energy prices demonstrates the potential power of carbon tax to drive changes in the investment and use the emission incentive technologies. The higher gasoline price in 2008 resulted in larger market share of the fuel efficient vehicles. Electric utilities responded by the dramatic decline of natural gas prices by switching dispatch from coal-powered plants.
I got some coal power plants there.
Coal power plants. Oh, here. Okay, so you're like 3 lines up.
Yeah, I was just about there. Alright. Sorry, cross it.
Just give me a second. My computer first.
No worries.
Do you want me to wait? Or? Okay. I'll just start.
Okay.
So let's just start from the bottom, LD13. Why? Can you explain this card? How it works? Why will electricity adapt to cleaner fuel?
Wait, where are you at?
The last card.
The
No link.
the no link. Yeah.
So basically, what we're saying here is that like exactly as the card reads, like there's no historical collapse here, and the electricity is not going to respond to these the price fluctuations by adapting to cleaner fuel.
What does that mean? Can you explain it in your own words?
So essentially, we've been moving to cleaner fuels for a while now. We've been incorporating things like solar, things like wind, these alternate biofuels, alternate forms of energy like that, and we haven't seen this grid collapse because electricity is able to accommodate for these changes and to adapt to it without suffering a major grid blackout.
Got it. So on the state CP, you had a 1, 2, 3 analytics. Did you read all of them?
Yeah, with the in the third one where it talks about the politics, this that obviously that's not relevant, but yeah, we read all of them.
Okay, we'll just ignore that then. What does it mean? How have we fiated out any discussion of energy policy by running state CP? Can you explain?
Well, so basically, like
does that
you
mean
pretty
we
much
can't
you
discuss
pretty much
energy
you pretty
policy?
much put it in the way that the state's counter plan sets it up is that we make this if all 50 states do it, then you get all of the impacts and all of the advantages of the affirmative by doing this exactly like the same thing. And if we try to call out any differences, it gives you 50 states that you could choose each one and be like, oh no, they're gonna do something different to try to it literally takes away any clash, because in order for the policy to work,
discussion?
what?
How does this fiat out discussion of energy policy?
Because
are you assuming that we just don't talk about energy policy because we're running the state CP?
No. What we're saying here with this is that
Moving target.
yeah, it's this moving target that you're basically it's yeah.
How is it a moving target? We have a plan text. Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Are you? Okay. What do you mean by sectoral taxes in your Gordon Matthews card?
So, with that, what we're talking about is just a further way that, we're just elaborating more on the solvency of
What's
the plan by
sectoral
showing
as
that,
opposed to other forms of
sector by sector. Do you want to take perm for the or
That's fine.
after that?
Right, you have 650 prep.
I will run prep.
Okay.
While they're running prep, is it okay if I go to the bathroom?
Yep.
I'll go for the What's up there?
Okay, you have 357 remaining.
Cool. Let me just send it to you guys. I'll wait for him to come back. Thing crashed and I restarted it. That was really annoying. I lost the timer. Yeah, I should have plenty. Should not run out. I should not have 2 more years. I won't enter it.
What's the order?
Alright, so I'm gonna go off the T shell that he kind of read, or like didn't really. He made a T argument. So I'm gonna go over that first, and then go over the ICHDA.
Okay.
So wait, is the ICH thing, that's the DA?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the one DA. The grid thing is not a DA. It's just a term.
Alright.
It's an impact term,
Yeah.
basically. There's some effect. Alright. Is everyone ready?
Good to go?
Alright. So start first, condo is good. It's one is best for education, forcing the AF to make critical decisions, maximizes the education and debate. Second is best for fairness. AF gets to go first and they have the last speech in 8 minutes in the 1AC. So multiple conditional advocacies are the only way to check this imbalance. 3, the multiple world scenario is good because it forces the AF to think critically on how to answer certain arguments and key is negative is key to negative flexibility. 4, it's most real world. Laws that go through Congress can be instantly rejected if they're not good enough. So it allows us to bring up multiple scenarios that test whether or not they're good. 5, making the neg a moving target is key to having non-repetitive debates. So basically this way we don't have to have the same debates over and over. 6, air AF on theory, neg gets to the block and control the outcome of the debate by strategically picking certain arguments. And 7, it's not even a voter, reject the argument, not the team. So if you really don't like it, just reject the counterplan. Furthermore, the 50 state fiat is good. 1, having the state government work is key to check the federal key warrants for in the United States part of the resolution. So he says we're not talking about like the climate change anymore, but yeah, sure, we're still talking about climate change, just under your framework. We're saying the actor is really important. This is a valid argument. This is non-topical. This is not non-topical, sorry. Second, real world argument should not be weighed. Debate is not real world. If it were then, the Earth probably would have been blown up by nuclear war by now. 3, reciprocity. 50 states acting as uniformly act functionally as one actor. 4, we increase AF ground when they can read a DA on any of the 150 states. 5, air neg on theory, AF gets first and last speech plus unlimited prep time. 6, not a voting issue, reject the argument, not the team. So again, if you really just don't like it, just reject the counterplan. You're not going to reject us as a whole. Now let's actually go on to the DA. They read you 2 pieces of evidence. One of them, Reynolds basically cites the IPCC for all their data. So you're going to still look at IPCC as the internal warrant. And Coquetel basically says it's real and anthropogenic, but like that doesn't mean anything. So first, impact hub. So overview. Solving warming locks Earth into a permanent ice age. CO2 reductions cause atmospheric ice crystals to form and freeze the oceans. That's 1 NC Hoyle evidence. This outweighs the entire case. A, magnitude extinction is inevitable. New ice age would make it impossible to grow food and cause ice sheets to literally crush Earth's surface. B is time frame. Ocean heat prevents the immediate onset of ice age conditions. Hoyle says the formation of atmospheric ice crystals would instantly plunge the Earth there. C is probability. We're on the brink. Ocean waters are close to freezing now. We need all the greenhouse we can get. Ice age comparatively outweighs the warming impacts. It's also irreversible and ensures extinction by 2027. Chapman 8. There's no doubt that the next ice age would be much worse than the previous one and much more harmful than anything warming may do. We have become dependent on a few temperature agriculture areas. Warming would increase agricultural output, but global cooling would decrease it. Glaciation could occur in 20 years. Cooling in 2070 is even faster than typical glacial transition. 2027 nations would cease to exist, vanishing under ice, and the rest of the world would be faced under catastrophe beyond imagining. Glaciation would last 1,000 centuries, an incomprehensible stretch of time, and it will happen quickly and soon. Scotsman 8. The last ice age took hold in just 1 year, more than 10 times quicker than previously believed. Scientists have warned rather than gradual cooling, the ice age plunged Europe into a deep freeze and abrupt shift in atmospheric circulation froze the continent instantly. The new findings add to fear the serious risk of this happening again soon. And their sources actually exaggerate to secure funding. Roche 3. There's no point in researching something we know is okay. We only hear bad stories. The constant need to attract scarce funding forces researchers to release preliminary data before it's analyzed, giving a false impression, encourages scientists to release more scary scenarios than actually exist. Environmental organizations have a vested interest in research results and political decisions on the media's role in negative perception. Dr. Roach said, everyone has heard the pessimistic stories. So on their whole, like, the Reynolds argument, so this is kind of, I'll read more evidence against the IPCC, but it's like all of this data is really over-exaggerated. Warming doesn't actually have this impact. Now let's actually go to the IPCC specifically. IPCC models are inaccurate. They're written over-exaggerated Young 9. Compounding problems of inaccuracy in climate models is their de facto publication virtually assured if the study is favorable in ADW. He found that it's more than 99.999% probable that climate studies' extent forecasts are biased in these two publications. Monocton specifically found errors via 30 equations that computer models used by the UN's climate panel models, IPCC models, which were purposely pre-programmed with such overstated or falsified values for the three variables whose product is climate sensitivity, resulted in 500 to 2,000% in overstatement. Monocton stated most recently that there is an overwhelming weight of evidence that the UN's climate panel, the IPCC, prodigiously exaggerates both the supposed causes and the imagined consequences of anthropogenic global warming. And IPCC climate models are inaccurate and rigged. Young 9. Did I read this one? I just skipped this one. I feel like I've already read something similar to that. And IPCC studies are flawed, aren't actually peer-reviewed, and are selective in the data they share. McLean 7. The IPCC undertakes no research for itself. There is strong evidence that the IPCC is very selective with the papers at which it cites and pays scant regard to papers that do not adhere to the notion that man-made emissions of carbon dioxide have caused warming. The IPCC is heavily based. They lead can themselves be researchers who work as cited in those chapters. This is the case with the so-called hockey stick temperature graph. The paper in which the graph first appeared was not subject to proper and independent peer review, despite which the graph was prominently featured in a chapter for which the co-creator of the graph was a lead author. The graph is debunked and has been omitted without explanation. The IPCC says scientists have a low level of understanding of many climate factors. If any natural climate factors are poorly understood, then they cannot be properly modeled. The output of the models will probably be incorrect. So at this point, Judge, there are no warming impacts. Like, their only evidence is Reynolds to this point. So Ice Age outweighs by a lot. But furthermore, just in case you're still confused, no warming near newest peer-reviewed studies prove Taylor 11. NASA satellite data from 2011 show the Earth's atmosphere is allowing heat to be released into space far less future global warming occur than UN computer models have predicted. There's a huge discrepancy between the data and the forecast. NASA satellite data show that atmosphere begins shedding heat into space long before the UN predicted. The new findings should dramatically alter the warming debate. The single most important issue is whether carbon dioxide will trap heat. Real-world data have shown that carbon dioxide emissions are not causing atmospheric humidity. When objective NASA satellite data reported in a peer-reviewed scientific journal showed huge discrepancy between alarmist climate models and real-world facts, climate scientists would be wise to take notice. So basically, what it's arguing is saying that, like, sure, there is some global warming caused from CO2, but there is no extinction threat. So skip the second card and skip the third card. The really important thing is, warming doesn't cause extinction at Longberg 8. Tycho is simply wrong. The IPCC predicts that sea levels will rise 18 to 59 centimeters. He is exaggerating by a factor of 400. Models unanimously show that Antarctic ice will increase because of increased precipitation for the next 3 centuries. Tycho's claim that 4 degrees Celsius will be the beginning of our extinction is beyond wrong and misleading. Again, this is what Reynolds cites, even though Reynolds is not the original author of this. Beyond wrong and misleading, made with no data to back it up, the Copenhagen Consensus did a survey of all the problems and all the benefits from a temperature rise of 4 degrees Celsius. More people will die from heat, but fewer from cold. Agricultural yields will increase in the temperature zones. Benefits outweigh the costs, reaching a total damage cost equivalent of about 3.5% GDP in 2300. This is simply not the end of humanity. Global warming is a net benefit now, and even in 3 centuries, it will not be a challenge to our civilization. The IPCC expects the average person on Earth to be 1,700% richer by the end of this century. So at that point, you realize that, like, all of their arguments that are like about extinction on the warming side don't have any like solvency. They don't actually tell you why warming causes extinction. And he actually admitted it. He was like, "Oh, we don't really say it causes extinction. We're just like guarding all these other impacts." But remember the impact calc I make at the beginning of the one of the 2NC. The Ice Age basically is, outweighs all of their case because they don't actually show you any larger impacts. Let's read the last cards, I guess. So empirics also disproved their extinction argument, NIPCC 11. Many of the predicted increases in climate have happened before in both terms of magnitude and rate, and yet biotic communities have remained remarkably resilient and thrive. CO2 concentrations increased up to 1200 ppm, temperatures increased by 4 degrees Celsius. What emerges is evidence for novel and stable ecosystem. There is very little evidence for broad-scale extinctions due to warming. The fossil record indicates remarkable biotic resistance to wide amplitude fluctuations in climate, and their impacts claims are speculative and wrong. And IPCC 10. Claims have been made about catastrophic negative effects. Nearly all of these are based on speculation. Past historical record periods were identified in which climate was similar to the projected models, and the real-world periods were examined. Far from causing extinctions, all the evidence indicates that was one of the most biodiverse intervals of time. At no site yet studied anywhere in the world is there evidence in the fossil record for large-scale climate-driven extinction during these intervals of rapid warming. So even if you look at the past, you see that there are extinction periods during the ice ages. There are none in warming periods, because this is the natural cycle of the Earth. And finally, consensus of experts agree there's no impact to warming. Issue 10. Most experts don't view climate change as the end for humans. Even the worst case scenarios don't foresee human extinction. Scenarios that are the mainstream climate community are advancing are not the end of humanity catastrophic scenarios, says Roger Peake Jr., a climate political policy analyst. Robecker, a renowned climate scientist at Columbia University, remains skeptical. The rise of CO2 isn't going to kill many people, and it's not going to kill humanity.
Okay, class 6.
Let me just get my timer. Yeah, I got you. You got it?
Yeah, I got you. Go.
Okay. Alright, so Ken, really quickly, so what was the purpose of you reading all of these cards against the IPCC?
That's like your only warrant on Reynolds. He cites IPCC.
So how do we use our IPCC card?
I mean, if you don't want to use it, it's great.
No, I'm asking you
How we use it.
We're gonna use it. I'm just saying how to use it.
It's not my burden to tell you how to use your own cards.
We use the IPCC, Judge, not to show that climate change is happening, but that international cooperation is key.
To
So,
mitigate it.
Okay. So does that have any impact on like?
I mean, then you didn't really answer it. I thought you were going with a 4 to 5 degrees Celsius argument. So if that's your argument, you actually didn't answer it yet. But
So okay, and then moving on. So how does this condo theory link to my speech? Anything
I mean, you made kind of like an extent theory argument, saying that like we should be allowed to run the 50 states counterplan because it doesn't talk about the actual topic, right? But I'm saying that like it's really necessary because one, like if we don't have an actor check, we don't know that the United States federal government is the best actor. So that's
That was
another key
condo?
part of the plan. What did you say?
But that was condo.
I mean,
Okay. So
conditionality. You said that, like we shouldn't be able to drop it, right? I'm saying conditionality is also good if you want to make that argument.
So with warming, are you ultimately saying that like the theory of global warming is like this massive conspiracy theory, but
It's not total conspiracy. That's also why it solves, right? So like it does exist, but the extent to which it exists is not even close to what people say it does.
okay.
So yeah, it definitely exists. and, like,
So what if there is, so if we don't do anything, if we just stay in the status quo, we're not heading towards anything. We're not heading towards the disad. Like status quo means
status
disad
quo,
doesn't get turned.
yeah, status quo is like this, that doesn't happen.
Okay,
But if
cool.
you limit the restrictions of CO2 emissions,
Where in our evidence that we threw in the 1AC or the 2AC do we talk about like humankind's extinction by global warming? Like specifically, like we're all gonna die if we don't solve the global warming.
you don't. That's the issue. I'm just negating the impacts if you read it again later.
Oh, so
This
you're
is my
just
block.
presuming that we're gonna like go for the like.
I mean, that's like the best shot for you, so I just like. you
Okay.
know,
Okay,
presuming, I
cool.
guess.
So then a little bit more. Okay, so ultimately, what was the answer to what was your answer to our state's counterplan argument of specifically that ultimately we do the same thing, there's no clash?
I mean, we'll address that later on. I was just
Okay.
dealing with the
I
theory
have the
part.
same thing.
Yeah, I'm just dealing with the theory part in case you want to go off of like rolled arguments later on.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's
no
all.
worries.
Okay, you set for the 1 hour?
Yeah, you ready?
Can you time 30 seconds?
Okay, you have 3:57.
about a minute.
2:56 left.
Okay. Wow. That's okay. We're gonna do case.
Are you reading this?
No.
Oh.
And then counterplan, and then the grid blackout DA something.
Case thing.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Case CP grids.
Alright. And did you send out?
No new cards.
the
No new cards? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Sorry, I wasn't
So in case we both had cards about British Columbia's carbon tax, theirs was Peterson and an LG, something like that, and ours was Tillman. Theirs says that carbon tax did work. Ours says gives actual figures and numbers saying that per capita there was a total increase of this much, and there was a per capita increase of emissions after the carbon tax was implemented. Theirs was in 2015, and ours is in August of 16. So ours postdates theirs. If nothing else, and you don't believe any of the warrants I'm about to tell you, then you can assume that public opinion towards the carbon tax changed between the 1 year that our cards were written. Our card is better because we actually use figures that show how, their only figure in there is like a 70% of the public agrees with this, and then there's some politician that's the head of this energy division, I think, in British Columbia that says it's great. Of course he'll say it's great. He's the one that made this. And we have, I believe, a journalist who is likely to be more unbiased than the government telling us that no, public opinion on this is very negative and it's horrible. Also, carbon tax will make companies, which in their case, in the app's case, is refineries, to pass a tax through to consumers. Any increase in tax, as Tillman states, hurts low-income families more than high-income families simply because it is a greater percentage of their income. So, petroleum refineries, petroleum goes into everything plastic. It's used to produce electricity. You use it in your car or whatever. So, it's a very ubiquitous item that they're taxing, which means that basically everyone will feel the impact of this tax, which I'll talk about in the grid thing later. So on the counterplan, extend Young 99, which is the preemption doctrine. The CP is mutually exclusive. There's no way states and federal government will agree to the same regulations, like the same multiplier for the variable carbon tax. Like the carbon tax won't be a flat rate, and it's not. And states are not going to agree to the same numbers as the federal government, and all 50 are not going to agree to the same one. That's what it means. Even though the policy says the default to the federal government, it's better in this case to use states because we have 50 different variable carbon taxes. So ours would be more tailored, more specific. This is also a net benefit. The other net benefit was federalism, but that if there's a federal carbon tax, it will upset a balance of power So extend Hogue 14, which said that the states tied to more than the federal government. Hogue 14 says that currently there are some chemicals that are being regulated by the states. So if you suddenly give this power to the federal government, it will upset this balance of federalism. That's very bad. Also extend Gallucci, which said that federal enforcement depends on the states. So this doesn't. I mean, you can't. It's mutually exclusive. So their cards about how states have financial difficulties doesn't apply because we're just collecting a tax. It's not like we have to spend that much money to collect the tax. There would be no point. Use multiple worlds to test our CP and ICHDA separately if they ever bring this up. So on the CP, they have 2 points, the 2 analytics, well, they have 3, but 1 doesn't apply. So first, we don't move energy policy discussion. We still have the 2 case cards in the case debate. The 2 case cards were Thielemann and the Wagner 08, I believe. We still have a case debate. We're still talking about energy policy. Their first point is completely irrelevant because, well, I mean, why? So next, on to blackouts in grid, EA. I mentioned this earlier, but a carbon tax is a deadly loss in the economy, and if there's a pass-through rate, which is if you do all the equations, I think it's 66%. 66% of taxes that are imposed on the supplier side go to the consumers. So it's not like we're just gonna make emitting carbon more expensive for some refineries. They're going to take that extra amount that they have to pay and charge the people who are buying their petroleum. And then if there's more of a downstream, like if there's refineries and then there's the people who, if there's more than one supplier in the chain, then it'll be even more taxes for consumers. So even if you're giving the revenue from the taxes to the people, to the black and brown bodies that are people that are living around the power plants, because ubiquitous product, then all low-income households everywhere and across the United States will be affected by this. So you're like helping some people that are living around this, but you are also making it so that other people who do depend on this because petroleum is a necessity have to pay this, and they're not allowed to just go like, well, it's expensive, I don't want to pay for it. They have to pay for it, which means that they're economically worse off. And this should be considered a disadvantage by itself. That's it. Anything else? No? Okay.
Okay.
Okay, take it, bro.
You have 10 minutes.
Cool. Alright.
any new cards to send out, so just reading off something typed up here.
Okay, what's your order?
We're going to go on case, which is going to have the blackouts thing on it, and then counterplan, and then on to warning.
Okay.
And sometimes I jump around a little bit. I apologize, but I'll try to signpost it the best I can where we're going. You ready to go? Judge? Go. First, on the case, structural violence outweighs any impact. How much longer do Black American communities have to endure life in a polluted environment? Tracy for Hurricane Cat's evidence us to keep going back to the hospital again and again if nothing is done. If there's a 1% risk that our plan can prevent such events, you voted for it. They were responding to the inherency question. So you presume the answer is a unique chance of solving status quo harms. The reason why we win is because we take a pragmatic approach to solving for material harms that exist. The structural imbalance should be resisted because Black American communities are facing disparate burden from oil refineries. That's our cane counts. 12 evidence. The tax disincentives negligent refining processes and encourages abatement in ways other policies can't. So they missed the entire point of the affirmative's solvency so far in this debate. They say that we're going through these extinction impacts from global warming, and that we've somehow been talking this entire time about how global warming isn't going to kill or is going to kill all of us. But they completely ignored our first advantage, which is where impacts really come in, and which is where if you do impact analysis, you'll see that the affirmative wins this round hands down. So our main impact on cases is environmental racism. It's our first advantage. Structural violence outweighs their impact. So their impact that they're weighing against us is this ice age impact. So we win because material suffering to these Black and brown communities is happening right now. They haven't refuted that. They haven't said that it's not happening. They haven't said that it's not man-made. They haven't said anything about that. What we're saying is that the best thing that we can do in this round is to vote to solve for this actual material suffering. So we went on magnitude. We went on magnitude because this is an actual, real, inherent burden that's happening right now. It's real. It's occurring. If we were to go down to Richmond, as we said in our 1AC evidence, it's occurring right now. It's happening right now. We don't have to wait for the ice age to come to kill everyone because people are dying right now from asthma and these diseases. We went on time frame once again because it's happening right now. And on magnitude, actual material suffering outweighs hypothetical extinction by an ice age any day. So we weren't going for global warming impacts. We never were. They spent a lot of time talking about these impacts, but we never were going for them. So you have to vote affirmative on the fact that we solve this material suffering, and they do nothing. They have no plan in place to solve for this actual minority suffering. So you have to vote AF on that. They didn't deny or address anything about this. They completely missed the goal of the AF. They say that we'll hurt the poor because our tax is going to raise energy prices, but we won't. Our tax is revenue neutral. We tax the producer, not the consumer. It's revenue neutral, and that money goes back to the communities. Once again, it's another level of solvency that the negative doesn't have. It's solvency in that it gives back and financially compensates some of the people that have been hurt, something that the negative has no plan for. They haven't even mentioned that it's been a problem yet. They also haven't really mentioned our R&D, our second advantage. So research and development, this idea that this carbon tax is going to spur innovation that can help mitigate climate change. We're mitigating climate change because it's the right thing to do, and there are impacts, but our impacts are not extinction. So yeah, they completely missed our first two advantages, or really our entire 1AC advantages. So you have to vote AF on our material suffering impacts. Moving on to the counterplan. So they never refuted our perm, so extend our permutation. Extend our Hughlin 99 evidence that national policy is key for community cooperation. And our Brown EPA 96 evidence that federal action along with state action is the best way to achieve solvency. So they never addressed this idea that some states don't have the money. They say that states counterplan is going to work where everybody's going to have their own tax. But if you extend our P16 or Rainbow 4 evidence, that says some states are not financially capable of producing this carbon tax, so they won't. So take West Virginia, for example. If we were left up to our own devices to impose a variable carbon tax, we never would. It wouldn't work. Or nobody in the state would vote for it. It wouldn't be a popular thing to vote for. So you have to vote affirmative on the fact that we can guarantee federal compliance with 50 states. 50 states are getting this tax put on them, not just what states want to do this. So the massive solvency deficit in the counterplan of the negative that the affirmative does not have. The affirmative guarantees compliance through 50 states. It guarantees the solvency, and the solvency deficit of the negative is a reason to vote for as a reason to vote for the affirmative. Once again, in the 1AR, they even said all states will not agree on the same one. That's a verbatim quote out of the 1AR. They're not going to agree on the same one. There's an easy way to make sure they all do agree on the same one, and they all have the same one imposed on them. That's a federal plan. So extend our permutation because we don't have the solvency deficit of the counterplan by itself. Moving on to the warming DA / ice age. So they deny warming. No warming now is literally the card text of their WSJ 12 evidence and their Taylor 11 evidence. So they deny the impacts of global warming, but somehow we're warming just enough that we're fending off an ice age. That's a performative contradiction right there, and the fact that we're warming enough to prevent the DA, but we're not warming enough to do any other sort of negative things is generally what the negative has been saying in this round. So that takes out their own DA. There's no impact there. You want to talk about impact calculus, and they talk about this ice age coming to extinct everyone. So global warming must be like pretty important. Like the fact that the world is getting warmer must be pretty important since it fends off an ice age, but it's not important enough that it will cause these other material impacts. Once again, we never claimed to mitigate climate change for extinction. If you extend our France 15 evidence, we want to prevent climate change because of preventable death, because of structural damages to roads and bridges in the United States, because of what it does to minority communities around the country. Those are the impacts that we're solving for, and they haven't addressed those, and their warming DA is just a contradiction on itself. They spend a lot of time talking about our IPCC 14 evidence. Once again, that's just to signal international cooperation, nothing about climate change. We never claimed extinction, so you have to vote F on the fact that we do something to improve material suffering. That's the largest impact in this round.
256 remaining.
I will run it all.
Okay.
May I run and grab a drink then, real quick, Joe?
Yep.
Are you good with all the water?
Do you want one?
Could you grab it all the way back?
Yeah.
They didn't respond to our answers about having right now either, so we actually have that. It seems weird. I understand how it works. So I gotta go. Alright, I'll keep going with the blackouts. No, it's done. That's fine. I'm gonna just go counterplan real quick, then go to the AC, and then the Ice Age DA, and then a summary.
Okay.
Everyone ready?
Give this second.
Alright, for the CP, we'll kick it. The perm works. Remember, I made a ton of T arguments if they want to come bring that back up. So now onto the 1A2. Extend Thielemann, we made this argument in the 2NC. Basically, the BC's tax example that already went into plan shows that this doesn't work for low-income families. So the issue with this tax is that even though they say it's revenue neutral, it all stems back to the families. So when the companies, the energy companies that are being taxed, they have to raise their prices when you tax them. This means that families, every single person who buys the energy is being taxed more. So they're going to tell you that it comes from the companies, but it stems down. What this means is that lower income families are more susceptible to the harms because they're paying more disproportionate amounts of their income for the same energy. So no matter how they frame it, they're actually hurting the low income families, and like this isn't so they say like so like this isn't actually like beneficial for the low income families, which is their main impact in the entire 1AC that they try to extend. Okay, so the BC card earlier says that like the revenue neutral tax only gives the extra money back to the people living around the power plant as compensation for living around it, and they don't address this at all. Don't let them bring it back up. Basically, it nullifies a lot of their impacts. Let's go into the impact card. So they say it's happening right now. Sure, I'll give them that, but let's look at magnitude. So at this point, you're seeing that they don't even win in like they don't even have a net positive in magnitude. You're hurting the people more than you help them. But even if you want to believe that they have an actual magnitude, they you're going to go back to the original example of like impact calculus being magnitude times probability, to the point where we bring up an extinction scenario that they try to make fun of. Extinction is an infinite magnitude. To this point, any probability of extinction will outweigh any sort of magnitude at 100% probability. There is no way they can mathematically beat us in the probability debate because they have no answers to our entire DA. The only answer they have, which I'll go to in a second, is that the WSGA card says it denies warming. Alright, so let's actually go into that. That's really important. So, like, sure, the way I framed the card is bad because the original use of the card was to deny that these catastrophic, issues with warming exist, or, cause extinction. So, yeah, the warming actually exists. The card, basically tells you that, the end result doesn't. So everyone tries to frame warming as this sort of issue that will eventually lead to extinction. So I'm reading all these cards about warming not existing, as in warming doesn't lead to the extinction scenario impacts. So he doesn't actually read you anything else. You don't prefer any evidence against it. We've told you why warming is actually solving for the ice age. We read specific evidence for that. So even if you don't buy the WSGA theoretical argument he makes, you still believe the fact that warming is enough to prevent the ice age because we read you specific evidence that he never touches. So at this point, we have magnitude, but we actually have time frame and probability as well. So remember, extend Scotsman 8, who tells you the last ice age took hold in just 1 year. That's your time frame. So to the point where he's like, oh, we have time frame. Our opponents are a hypothetical extinction scenario. This isn't hypothetical. He never answers our time frame card. At this point, you extend it all the way through. We win in time frame and in magnitude. So the last one is probability. Remember, we're on the brink. Ocean waters are already close to freezing now. They never respond to a single issue about probability as well. So theoretically, we still have 100% probability because he never touched on it. At this point, we outweigh on all three, but you don't even need probability. Remember, any chance of an extinction scenario outweighs any other impacts because it's an infinite magnitude times a probability. This is always infinite. So let's actually go back to the one I said. We're going to do some weighing now. So to the point where he can't even give you a net positive impact, his first burden is to show you that he's actually helping the people in these disadvantaged areas. Remember, if he had only used the carbon tax, sure, he may have actually had these benefits. But the issue is he used a revenue neutral carbon tax. What this means, based off of the BC's example at least, is that when you take the money from the people, you're not actually disproportionately giving it out to all the low income families. You're doing it to the people around the power grid. What this means is when the power grid raises the prices for people living further away, you just disproportionately make the low-income families suffer from the increased prices that take up a larger portion of their income. This basically doesn't help them at all. He could still extend the disease and death rates and stuff, but he doesn't actually quantify that either, and it's not nearly as big of an impact. So to the point where he never actually talks on ice age, that's game over. He has nothing that can outweigh the ice age extinction scenario. He never talks about probability, he never talks about time frame, and he never talks about the magnitude. He hasn't addressed it at all. He hasn't read anything other than Reynolds, which is the 4 to 5 degree Celsius thing that I read multiple cards about. He has nothing other than Cocktail, which says it's real and anthropogenic. I concede those actually. The issue here is that warming doesn't lead to extinction. They never read anything on that. So your only default here is neg, because because you only have like the large ICHDA impact left. Anything else you want to say? All right, I'll just stop there.
Alright, we're gonna take break.
Yep, you have 509.
gonna go case ice age disadd or case ice age counter plan. Counter plan's quick.
Okay.
Y'all ready? Cool. Judge? Joe?
So to start off this entire round, what have we been telling you? We've been telling you that the most important impact of this round is environmental racism, and so just to remind you of the argument that we've been trying to present here, we've been trying to debate about, that we've been trying to solve for, that they've just completely ignored. So environmental racism with these petroleum refineries locating themselves in these communities and pretty much just polluting their environment, making them sick, and giving them death. This is what we need to solve for, and we're the only team that does that. This is a reason to vote for the affirmative. We talked about in our last speech in the 1AR that they completely ignore this, and we need to stress to you that material suffering is happening now, and that always outweighs hypothetical extinction. We'll get more on that later. Once again, we win on the magnitude because the reality is that people are dying now, and it's real. It's guaranteed that that's happening. There's clearly no guarantee that ice age. I'll expand more on this. There's clearly no guarantee that we're going to die of ice age extinction because there's plenty of evidence saying that we're going to die from global warming extinction, the exact opposite. So at the very least, when there's no certainty of the ice age extinction, you have to weigh in the material suffering that is happening now that we can solve for. It's part of a bigger problem in the United States. It's part of the continued racism in the United States, and through this resolution, it's a way to solve for it. So on the magnitude, if we even save one life, then we are winning. Then on time frame, we solve right now. As soon as the judge votes for the affirmative, the community benefit fund gets set up, and it goes back to the families. And then on the probability, absolutely, it 100% happens. This money goes back to them. So they talk about how they talk a little bit on this grid argument. I don't know where you flow it, but I have it on the case that basically this blackout is bad, and this is going to affect all of this is going to affect electricity prices, and so once again with all of their arguments about this carbon tax hurting the family and causing all of these other impacts. We need to remind you that this is not on the consumer. This is on the producers. And even if it does hurt the poor families are going to get hurt in the status quo anyways. At this point, at the very least, we give back to them. So then, on the ice age, first of all, just the overall summary. Do you really think that evidence about global warming gets outweighed by evidence about ice age? How many years have we been seeing that the ice caps are melting? This is general. This is common knowledge. This is absolutely common knowledge. So if you think about the polar ice caps melting, how does that show you that there's an ice age going to happen? Then you extend the evidence that, what was that? Yeah. So if you extend the evidence that we had about all of our evidence that talks about how global warming is real and anthropogenic, and how without reducing emissions now, we are going to cause a heating of 4 to 5 degrees Celsius, which has a tremendous impact on all of our lives internationally. So their only link is that global warming is not happening now, and that gets taken out once you factor in all of the overwhelming evidence. The overwhelming evidence that we talk about every single day, every single weekend here in debate about global warming. And so and then the performative contradiction that my partner brought up about so we under this theory, warming is happening, which he said that he misread it. Like, warming is happening, but it's only happening slightly enough to fend off the ice age. The reality is that but then as soon as we stop polluting and we stop the CO2 and we stop warming everything, then this ice age is just going to erupt. No. So the other thing about this is that you sit here and you weigh out two arguments that completely clash and go against each other. And so on one side, it says if we don't do anything, we're going to have tremendous difficulties globally with our environment. And on the other side, it says that if we do something, we're going to have this global ice age, which I would point out, if for all of their arguments about like how extinction comes and how all of that is their magnitude, that means both sides have this argument. So no matter who you choose, there's going to be extinction. This round needs to be weighed on who is doing something for environmental racism. And then onto the counter plan really quickly. I know that they dropped it, but extend the perm. This is really abusive time to drop it. We spent so much time debating about the counter plan and the state's counter plan that you should reject the team for this abuse on dropping it in the very last speech after everyone has just spent 30 minutes each debating about this. So quick overview here. Once again, cannot stress it enough. The biggest impact in this round is the material suffering happening now. You need to vote for the team that actually solves for that happening, not a team that presents hypothetical potential scenarios. Vote for the affirmative.
Good debate. That was interesting. Good debate. Good debate.
My hands are sweaty.
Oh, that's okay.
Well,
No
because
worries.
I'm showing hands when my hands are kind of.
No worries.
Hot, hot.
Oh. Good debate.
Joe was the one.
Yep.
Okay.
Is NYU in the city? NYU's in the city, right?
Yes, we are directly in downtown.
Directly right there.
Yep.
How far was it?
Like a 2-hour bus tour.
That's cool.
How about for you guys? Did you fly up or bus?
I wish we flew out.
Yeah, we like rented some like SUVs, vans. It was like probably 6 hours.
Oh,
Yeah.
A little rough.
A little rough, a little rough.
Between 6 and 7. Yeah.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay.
So I think this debate is pretty good, but I think that the main issue for both sides is that I think both teams could do a better job of impact calculus and weighing. And so I get your math equation. I teach time frame times probability times magnitude, but impact weighing is not just a math equation. And so like when you're telling me to weigh extinction versus like, you know, people of color are being disproportionately burdened, whereas extinction is sort of like we're all in it together. Why is that worse, right? Why is the ice age? Probably the ice age would probably disproportionately affect minority populations just as much as global warming would at the very least and things like that. And so you need to be able to sort of make connections more directly way. Be like, yeah, racism is bad, but if we were all dead, we can't be able to deal with fighting things like racism. And then also go back to your case argument about how you make, you know, how would they increase the cost, which makes it bad for minorities and various different things like that. Opposed to just being like, well, we have 100% magnitude, we're all gonna die, all dead is gonna be worse. Is warrant these sort of things out more. Same sort of thing on the affirmative. You say, we're fighting racism, we're fighting the systemic violence, we have to put this first, that's more important than extinction. Why? Right? And I think that you need to flesh that out a lot more than you end up doing. In the end, I do end up voting negative. I vote negative on the ice age just said because their evidence is comparative. It says directly that the ice age will kill more people than global warming, and that while we could survive increased temperatures, we cannot survive the decreased temperatures that would then kill us all. And so I ultimately decided that I don't have to fully determine whether or not extinction is more important than systemic violence, because the case debate about raising prices indicates that you might not be able to actually help all poor people and people of color because it's going to increase prices. And I get your response that the taxes are on the companies, but their response to that in the block and then the 2&R is, well, the companies just push that price down the line, right? It's the same thing against raising minimum wage, is that the companies will will make that cost go on to the consumer, raise the prices of everything, and then no one can afford everything, which makes it harder for people who can't be able to afford stuff. In addition, they also say that your plan only gives money to people who are close to the power plants, which is not necessarily every poor and minority person that exists out there, so there is going to be some that are left behind. So that means that I think that there is a risk that your affirmative is not going to be able to solve the systemic violence, and the only real response that you have to the disadvantage is like, there's tension when they say global warming isn't happening, and it is happening, but as he's reading the cards, I do think some of the cards in the 2NC potentially go further than you want them to, right? Being like the IPCC is all filled of liars who don't say anything, don't peer review their information. You want to agree that warming is anthropogenic and exists, but then cut off that terminal implication arguments. And that's what the majority of their evidence is saying. It's that global warming is not as bad as the scientists are saying. What's worse is the ice age that's coming, right? And so your only response is that there's tension, and he's more or less resolving the explaining the tension that the evidence, that the majority of the evidence is reading. That's enough of a reason for why I think the ice age would be worse. I think that in this debate, right, you're West Virginia, you should read your Callahan evidence that your coach would probably put out, right?
I was thinking to myself way late, and I was like,
yep. Like your 1AC doesn't have any extinction impact specifically for the reason that when they run a disad that causes extinction, you can win the debate on critiquing the representations of extinction via Callahan, right? And so like I've seen this happen in a lot of other West Virginia rounds, and it works really wonderfully. But when you just go to systemic violence outweighs, you don't really have anything on why extinction isn't likely, right? Your Callahan evidence says not only is extinction not going to happen, it's overblown, but it causes us to deliberately ignore the day-to-day violences, which are more direct and are more likely to cause extinction. So in the world where even extinction is going to happen, it's more likely where we are constantly focusing on these things. And your Callahan evidence called survivability is really good. I think that if that's in the 2AC, it's much easier for me to figure out why your systemic violence is outweighing, but when that's not there and just systemic violence outweighs, it's difficult for me to end up looking past a more or less drop disad. I do think that the 2AR can win it if, 2 to 3 minutes on systemic violence outweighs, biggest impact. Doesn't matter if we cause extinction, because that's not what we should care about. If we all die tomorrow, but we have chosen not to be racist, that is a better world than preserving racism indefinitely into the future that is disproportionately hurting people, would be, the 2AR that wins it, and then answering more fully the increased cost disproportionate burden, which is what I'm using to sort of like mitigate some of your solvency claims. And so if the 2AR is just those two things, I think that you are in better shape. You're not going to get judges to vote on they kicked the counter plan, that was a waste of time. If you didn't have the theory arguments that existed prior in the debate, making those sort of arguments like conditionality being bad, especially given that the 2NC, for no real reason, reads a whole bunch of conditionality good arguments when there is no conditionality bad argument in the 2AC. The theory violation is 50 states bad. I did think you were initially going to drop that and you read the wrong theory block, but you do come back and read the 50 states good theory block, so that's good, but your conditionality block is unnecessary. But especially when they read that, there's no way you're going to get a judge to vote on it because it's not part of that debate. So if you want conditionality, make sure that exists, that argument exists in the 2AC. The other thing that I would say is that it would be useful to explain, I don't necessarily think that on face your affirmative has to decrease emissions in global warming, right? You're just taxing it. So companies can continue to emit as much as they want, they just have to pay for it, right? Which is the T argument for why carbon tax isn't topical. But in the world where there isn't that T argument and they're saying you solve global warming that causes the ice age, I think you could probably link that being like, no, we just cause refineries to tax, which means that they can continue to pollute, or they'll just move somewhere else where they're not disproportionately affecting people. We have no decrease in global warming, we are just solving where they're going to be situated and forcing them to pay money to the people that they're hurting, so that way they could get the necessary medical attention, so that way they could deal with asthma and some of those consequential those secondary effects, right? Because there is no claim about solving warming except for maybe like your R&D type stuff, right? But they aren't really they don't point that out, that your R&D shows solves warming, and you aren't going back to the R&D stuff either as a result, which means that it's more or less dropped in this debate. The other thing you can do with your R&D stuff is you could say some of your R&D stuff is alternative energy. Sometimes it's just like it spurs innovation and technology, right? If the ice age is coming and we have better technology and innovation, that might mean that we might be able to offset the negative effects of ice age through the research and development that your plan would essentially be able to fund and things like that. So you think of some sort of creative ways to go on about that. You can also question the time frame of it, right? It's going to take a while to eliminate the parts per million that are in the atmosphere, which means that if nothing else, that there'll be a time in which ice age isn't killing us, and we've solved the disproportionate effects, which means there's a series of months or years that we can intervene in order to be able to stop the ice crystals from forming in the ocean, right? So it's not as immediate as he says it's going to be, because that immediacy assumes that like CO2 just disappears overnight, and there's plenty of things other than refineries that are causing warming across the world that you could say would be able to check back against it. But all those are sort of like more defensive arguments. I think the heart is winning systemic violence outweighs. Read your Callahan evidence in the 2AC, always if they run a dissent with an extinction impact, and then that gives you something to weigh, and then you can be like, you should reject them because they're extinction rhetoric independent of anything else.
Okay.
For the two of you, don't talk about the same thing in the negative block. All right, so don't, you both do double coverage. You want to make sure that you don't do that, because the 1 hour essentially becomes repetitive at points when you sort of go to some of the parts of the debate that he's talking about.
What did I was not aware of this. What did I repeat?
I went back to the counter plan and wrote stuff in the sort of similar spots, like on the in theory and stuff like that. Answering the theory T type arguments that exist would be what I would say, is where it becomes repetitive. And then I also think that you probably could have, I don't know what you did in prep for the 1 and C, but I think you probably could have eliminated that prep for the 1 and C, because it seems like this is a relatively generic strategy without a lot of specifics, so you could have more or less had that set up ahead of time. And then I would also encourage both of you to use all your speech time opposed to not as much. And so for the 2 and R, where you have a minute left, the things that you could do there is actually talk about, extend specific pieces of evidence, like your Chapman evidence that is directly making a comparison claim, and be like, they should not be able to say global warming is worse. They've conceded Chapman that deliberately says even if global warming is real, the worst of it is not nearly as bad as the ice age, right? You just are repeating sort of like taglines, sometimes a little bit of thing, but you're not connecting it back to evidence, which means that judges aren't going to do that work going back to evidence, whereas if the 2AR gets up here, points to tangible pieces of evidence and extends it, that's going to be more structurally appropriate, and so judges will oftentimes default to that if you're just sort of talking opposed to sort of going back to the evidence that's read in the negative block, and that would fill out the last bit of your time really well. 1 and C, if you're like, okay, I finished and my partner's pulling cards for me now, think of just a bunch of analytical arguments that you make. There's no time frame to solvency. The EPA won't be able to adequately enforce things. They won't immediately be able to solve all forms of environmental racism because there's nuclear power plants and other things, right? Just some common sense analytical arguments, so that way you could take up some time while he's searching for an additional card for you to read, and that also diversifies your case arguments. Otherwise, you're standing silently, he's looking for evidence, they're preparing answers to what you've already read, and it ends up hurting you more. If you're just making some analytical arguments, that means that they have to continue flowing you. You don't have to go for those analytical arguments, but if they drop them, and they drop there's no time frame for solvency, or the EPA won't enforce it, then it's much easier to win that debate. So a lot of times those short, small analytical arguments are useful regardless, but they're definitely useful if you don't have like the cards or the other time to fill up speech time, would be what I would say. Any questions?
Oh, that's good. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thanks for the debate.
Thanks.
Hey, good luck.
Back to you guys.